Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar book review. This one is going to be for Avatar The Last Airbender Imbalance Library Edition. So what this is of course it's the hardcover collected edition of Imbalance, which is the 6th Avatar comic trilogy. So all three parts of Imbalance are collected together in this big hardcover book. Very nice, you know, you can see the spine here, there's the back. Big book. So yeah, once again, just to confirm this, because I know a lot of people are kind of you know, it's kind of unclear just by looking at like product listings online what exactly the difference is. You know, we have Imbalance Part 1, Imbalance Part 2, Imbalance Part 3. This is how this comic series originally came out. These three books, which together as three books make up the entire trilogy of Imbalance. These three books are collected together in this big book, and you can see the size difference here between it. Obviously it's pretty noticeable. The hardcover, the library edition, is a lot bigger, so you do get bigger art in the hardcover edition. And I suppose getting into the first topic, which is literally just, I suppose, based on like a buying decision. If you want to get Imbalance, should I get the individual parts or should I get the hardcover? What are the differences? The three parts are basically just the comics. That's all you get. It's just three paperback books that feature the content of the story. Each book is like 72 pages long, so overall you get 216 pages of content, and that's it. Small size, they're smaller comics, these ones, in terms of just like kind of across and down. They're smaller than typical comics, so there is value in the big hardcover book, which is more typical comic collected size. Now, the difference, of course, is that this isn't literally just a hardcover version of these three. You get some extras. One extra is, of course, just the fact that it's bigger, the fact that it is a very nice hardcover book. The second thing is that you do get annotations throughout the book by both members of the creative team, the two main members of the creative team, the writer and of course the artist. So Faith Erin Hicks and also Peter Wortman give comments throughout the book on the sides of the pages, giving some insight into what's going on. The last thing that's new to the library edition is that you get about 10 pages of concept art at the very end of the book. So your decision basically is about, do you just want the story in the cheapest way possible and you don't really care about the size, format, stuff like that? Then in that case, the individual parts are probably what you want. But if you're more of a collector, you like the idea of the big book that you want to have on your shelf, you want the art in the biggest size possible, and you like the extras and the annotations, then yeah, there's value in getting the library edition because it does offer a little bit more. It's cool to have this big deluxe Avatar book that's kind of impressive to hold. The pricing, obviously this standard retail price on the Imbalance Library Edition is $40. Standard retail price on one of these parts is $11, so $33 for the three of them together. So it is a bit cheaper if you just want the story to get the three individual parts. But you can probably find both books for cheaper online. You could probably, I think most of the time you can usually get these for like $8, $9, give or take, online. And then similarly with this, you could probably find it for more like $35 or maybe slightly under that. And then it's completely up to you about what decision you want to make. But yeah, let's from there move into the actual, you know, book itself. And you know what's going on with it. We'll just quickly do the comparisons to some of the other library editions first. So I suppose we'll start off with a comparison to the previous, the last Avatar comic trilogy hardcover, which of course was North and South, the 5th series. So they're both the same size, as you can see here. The spines, of course, match. Sorry, as you can see here, North and South, Imbalance. It all fits together really nicely, so it adds perfectly to the collection. Nothing has changed here because of the creative team change. We went from Team Gurihuru for North and South to Peter Wortman and Faith Erin Hicks here. Dean Yang, of course, wrote the other comics. But, you know, the style is the exact same. It's just that, of course, the art changes from, you know, Team Girahuru to Peter Wortman. The spine here features Aang and Momo. So that's that. Otherwise, the format is the same. All the Avatar books have annotations and art extras, so they're the exact same size. And that's really all there is to say. I could get out all the other library editions, from The Promise to The Search, The Rift, Smoke and Shadow, but it'd just be showing off a bunch of other books. If you have any of these other ones, the Imbalance one matches it perfectly. The other difference, I suppose, would be the Turf Wars, the first Korra comic trilogy collected into a library edition. The Turf Wars library edition is different, and they seem to just in general be doing the library editions for the Korra comics a little bit differently. So straight away you can see here that while they're the same, both books are the same height, they're not the same width. The Avatar books are all a decent little bit kind of wider, and that is to account for the fact that the Avatar comics have annotations, the Korra comics don't. Now, you may think, oh, the Korra comics are just missing something, but I'll get into discussing the value of the annotations and why they may seem like an amazing bonus, but they're not really as much as you think. So, as a brief comparison, there's a difference between the spines. Of course, Korra has more of a sort of darker blue, almost navy and grey kind of colour scheme, whereas the Avatar books have a black and red sort of colour scheme for the symbols underneath, but the same general format for them of just the layout of the name, little art image, Dark Horse, title of the series, and Nickelodeon up here. So that's what there is to say about that. The main difference, though, getting into this, is that it's a thing that I think a few people have pointed out with these books, is that at times you can open them up and it can seem like a little bit barren. Like, you open up this book and it's cool, you have the pages, but then you also see there's these massive gaps. Like, there's a huge gap here from the edge of the page to the actual the edge of the comic page to the edge of the actual book, and the same on the other side, because these are two pages that happen to have no annotations either side. So it's revealed here, I suppose, basically, that the book has gaps on every single page, regardless of if they have annotations on them or not. Meaning that a lot of the book can look kind of barren with such giant borders, because there's only less than a third of the pages in these books have annotations. And like, just randomly choosing it, like, it's, there's 3 pages in a row I didn't actually get any annotations. Here's finally a page that has it. You can see just there that on these 2 pages, that little comment there is the only annotation on these 2 pages. And all it says, it's from Peter Wortman. It says, "I have zero idea how the machine in the background works, but it's probably super dangerous." Very insightful. Not really. And that's to me the thing with these comics. And I'll get into the annotations in just a second, of like, I think it looks kind of bad in these books that you do open up like 2 out of 3 pages and it's not going to have an annotation on it. And the art isn't as big as it could be, because they have to account for the fact that, most of the pages won't have annotations, and very few of them are going to have a sort of more extended annotation like this, where it's actually a few sentences long. But even then, there's very few of these, and most of the annotations are just a quick one-line statement that doesn't have a lot to say. Whereas I actually much preferred the shift in style for the Korra comics, where it's just full page art, no borders, no extras, and it just looks so much better to me. Of like, I hadn't looked at this book in a while before I picked it up to compare it for this review, and it was just like almost like amazed to see, like, wow, look how great it looks just opening it up and it just being full-size pages. The Korra library editions do it slightly differently, that instead of doing annotations at the start, there's a foreword from the writer and basically an introduction from the artist. So each of the main 2 creative members on the team gets basically a full page at the start to write out like a full piece basically. And I think that works really well to get more insight from them. As you can see here, this is a foreword by Michael Dante DiMartino, who of course wrote the Korra comics. And then you get, like I said, the introduction by Irene Coe, who is the artist on the Korra comics. And then at the end, they still have the 10 or so pages of art extras at the back. I just think that format works that little bit better. Whereas here, like I said, you get those borders on like top, bottom, and on the sides, of course. But you do also then, at the end, get your 10 pages of concept art. And this is actually really cool. I like this. This is probably my favorite part of these library editions, is getting to see the concept art. So there's like kind of, you know, a design for Katara and like her kind of undershirt basically. Just getting an insight into the design process, of like some insight from like Peter Wortman about how the designs for some of the other characters went, like his early attempts to draw, you know, Aang and stuff like that. The designs for the new characters like Li Ling, Ya Ling, and Ru. Even just more of the background characters like the Firebender characters and so on. And then we've seen this, of course, before when the new designs for the new artists were revealed, but it's nice to have them here in the art book. It's just very, very cool. Similarly, here's, you know, the idea of how he went about designing Cranefish Town and so on, some concept stuff, and he mentions that he used sort of 3D models to keep it all sort of consistent. And then on the last page you get another one. That's very, very cool. But I think the annotations always remain a point of debate with these books, because let me get into some of the statistics on it, because I like kind of covering this in these videos. So like I said before, there's only annotations on less than a third of the pages in this book. But what are these specific numbers? So there are 216 pages of content within Imbalance Part 1, 2, and 3. 72 pages each. 72 times 3 is 216, of course. So at most there could be 216 pages with 216 annotations on them. In this case, we get 65 pages that feature annotations out of 216. Less than a third by a pretty kind of solid margin, like in or around, you know, 10-ish pages. Now, how does this compare to the other Avatar books, which also featured annotations? The Promised Library Edition had 58 pages with annotations. The Search Library Edition had 51 pages with annotations. The Rift only had 36 pages with annotations. Smoke and Shadow went up to 60 pages with annotations. And North and South, like Imbalance, also had 65 pages with annotations. Now, that may seem like a relatively big number. That means there are comments on 65 pages. That's quite a lot, isn't it? Except when you realize that a good amount of them are relatively minor comments. Like I showed you, not all of them are the big sort of like block of text style comments. A lot of them at times are just complete one-line moments that don't give you any insight into anything. And it's just a comment on this thing happened in the book. And there are runs of pages during important moments in the comic where there are no comments whatsoever, when you would maybe want them to comment about something. They don't. So I think they are, to me, they remain very, very disappointing. Like, here's 2 pages from the book. As you can see, no annotations on that page, but there is one on this page. It's pretty small, and what it says, it's from Peter Wortman: "I had fun designing these rival gangs." Like, it almost feels like a joke in a way reading that, of like, really? Both creators went through this book adding comments on the pages, and that's something they felt needed to be put into print. That comment about this, given that the designs for the gangs are covered in the concept art at the back. It just feels so unnecessary. On the next page, Peter Wortman, Toph has a very practical approach to problem solving. And it's literally just a relatively vague comment about what's happening on the page. Apart from that, Faith Erin Hicks, I'm absolutely with Sokka here. Getting in the middle of a bender fight if you're not a bender seems super dangerous. It's a lot of these comments are just kind of like, you're the creators on this book. Tell us about the full process of this. Faith Erin Hicks, I feel, doesn't ever really go into writing process or anything like that. What the intent behind this story was, writing decisions, characters and stuff like that, it's really not gone into. There's maybe one or two across the entire book that feel a little bit more insightful into what's actually going on here. But it's not what you really want. My issue with Imbalance as a comic, in terms of a bit more review here of the actual story, was that it felt very like lacking in substance, that not a lot of big stuff happened. It felt that they were almost entirely reliant on, you will like this book because it's very connected into what's going to happen in Korra. But that didn't hit home as hard for me because there's still so much time between here and Republic City actually properly happening, and like Toph becoming a police officer, Republic City being established. Like, it still feels like we're nowhere near that yet, but this is a book that is completely reliant on, we're making the connections, see what we're doing here? And it just felt like there wasn't enough kind of notable stuff happening here in the present. And look, there's a few comments that are, I think, a little bit better. You know, Peter Wortman says here, something I really liked about Faith's script is how we immediately see some of the downsides of bending here. There are consequences to having cool scenery-destroying fights in the middle of a place people live. So that's getting into the idea of the gangs, which are going to become the triads, destroying stuff, and non-benders and just people in general suffering for bending fights happening in the middle of a big city. That's fine. That's a good insight. But it's also fairly obvious from the content. Like, it's not particularly interesting. And again, a lot of this is earlier on, because the way the comments go is that, like, there's 27 annotation pages for Imbalance Part 1. There's 21 annotation pages for Imbalance Part 2, and only 17 for Part 3. So they really fade away as the series kind of progresses. And I think the worst part of the annotations in this book is that there are only 2 pages with annotations on them within like the last 16 or so pages of the book. And one of those, the second last page with annotations is probably the biggest example of just like, are you serious type thing in the entire book. Let me try and find it here. Yeah. Here, it's these 2 pages. So, you can see here, we're right towards the end here, like what is page 213, there's only a handful of pages left. Oh look, 2 almost completely blank pages, except for, right here, down at the bottom, there is an annotation here that just says, punching, feeling, because once again in the book, Toph has punched someone on the arm, which we know means like affection, basically. Now, that would be an interesting comment if Faith Erin Hicks hadn't pointed that out the previous time it happened in the comic. She made an annotation about it back then in Part 1 or Part 2, whenever it happened. And so this is like a repeat comment, and is like one of the only comments in this last section of the book. Basically, the last one before there's some comments on the very last page, meaning that between here and the end of the book, they completely skip past comments on a lot of the bigger moments in the book, like as we resolve the issues with the villains and stuff like that, as the series comes to an end. There's no insight into the writing process of like the characters at this sort of stressful point of the story. No, it just is immediately and then at the end. And it's just like, yeah, Cranefish Town is going to become Republic City. I wonder when that will happen type thing. So it's the reason I brought up the Turf Wars one a lot is basically because I feel this library edition for Imbalance would have been much better served doing the format in the same style as this book, of giving Faith Erin Hicks and Peter Wortman, the foreword and the introduction. A whole page to just give their thoughts on working on this book. And just over the course of those paragraphs, explain what you wanted to say, rather than trying to fit in these sort of, one-line comments that aren't particularly insightful or even all that interesting most of the time. I think that would work better. I get for consistency's sake that it would annoy people if they removed the basically the format, if they changed up the format. But if they did just stop it and they basically said, okay, from here on out in the Avatar comics there will be no annotations, they could still make the art slightly bigger. There would probably still need to be a border to keep the book as wide as it is, but you could definitely make the art, I'd say, about 10% bigger, which I would definitely appreciate, rather than just having these massive borders on the sides on so many pages that just don't feature anything. Because again, it's great when you say there are 65 pages that do feature annotations, but then when you have to say, but wait, that means there are over 140 pages, and it's more like 150 something or whatever, that don't feature annotations, and most of the pages that do feature annotations aren't even that interesting. That's always been the issue that I've had with the annotations, in that the best thing I can say about them is that they're a fun little thing to have there when you are rereading the comic via the library edition. But I don't ultimately think they're worth it, in that I would not in any way suggest to anyone to buy this book solely to get those annotations. That's what I would say. That there's nothing in there that you need to specifically go out of your way to buy this book just for the annotations, just because they're new. There's not a lot in there, honestly. Buy this book because you like the hardcover editions, you have the other ones, you want to add this to your collection, and you like the art extras and just the impressiveness of a book like this. So that's what I'd say about it. I'll just quickly cover some of the stuff from the start of the book, because I know some people like this stuff. It's just the fact that, you get these little pieces of art as you go through the initial sort of introduction pages of just there's Suki and her mount. There's a little image there of Aang and Katara that they have there on more of the credits pages. And then again, how they do the difference between the parts is basically like this. When I turn the page here, we're straight into Imbalance Part 1. So what they do is they have a clean image of the cover for Imbalance Part 1, which is, as you can see here. So Imbalance Part 1, Imbalance Part 1 clean cover here in the book. And they do the exact same when they get to the gap between the other books of there's Imbalance Part 2 and the end of Imbalance Part 1. And then Imbalance Part 3, the gap is just about here. Yeah. So you can see just there. That's when they do it, and there's the cover for Imbalance Part 3. So you don't miss out on the individual covers, basically, when you get the library edition. They're still in there, they still get a page of their own, and it's the clean cover, so it doesn't have any of the graphics and stuff like that on it. It's just the full piece of art, which is really nice to see, of course. Of course, in the individual parts, you still do get that. It's just obviously at a bigger size here. So yeah, it's the best thing I could say about this book is just that, it's consistent. These Dark Horse big books are always super, super good quality. Like the Promise one I've had for so many years since it's come out, and I don't pull it out that often, but it's held up very well over the years. They make these books with really, really nice quality. It's a really good book and well made. I still prefer in general to usually go back to the kind of these books to read, just because this is sort of awkward. It's just such a big book. It's kind of heavy, kind of tricky to open at times, but it's nice to look at for as part of the collection, to have this copy of the book that I do treat really, really well and don't just keep taking out and so on. So it is definitely more of a sort of a collector piece style thing, but for people who do like that, collecting all the merchandise, expanding their collection, they've done a good job with this, for sure, in that it's very consistent with the rest of the library edition releases. So that's probably the main thing to say. There hasn't been a massive quality drop or anything like that. If you liked Imbalance, if you collected the other ones, you should get this one also. So yeah, it's out now. It came out earlier on this week, both in comic book stores and bookstores. It was one of those situations where the release dates were like a day apart once again. I was just a little bit late getting it because there's some comic store like shipping problems outside of America. I think they're only doing it like every 2 weeks instead of every week there are comic releases, and this was one of the weeks I think they were off. So I had to order this online, and it arrived just a few days after release, but I'm still covering the book within the first week of release. So yeah, that's pretty much the review here of the Imbalance Library Edition. In the comments, if you have any questions about the books or thoughts on the book yourself, if you already have it, let me know. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.